So today's topic is when the going gets tough. Okay, has anyone ever had a problem? Ever? Anyone? Anyone? Okay, a couple of you. Want somebody in the back there. Yeah, the going does get tough, doesn't it? It gets tough, when you expect it and when you don't expect it. Part of the problem is we tend to think that if the going gets tough, there's something wrong with us. That if we were doing things right, if we were doing this thing called life right, we would just glide through and there would be no disturbances in the field. Everything would be fine. But it doesn't seem to work out that way, at least not, it may for you, it doesn't for me. So what we're used to hearing after that, when the going gets tough, is the tough get going. We all know that, right? We've been told that. How many of you were told that when you were a little kid, right? Yeah. Usually when you just run into a wall or something and, you get up when the going gets tough, the tough get going, Well, what about me? I'm not tough, What if you're not tough? What happens to you? I guess you just lay there. And the world goes on. That's kind of the implication, isn't it? If you don't get tough, you're not going to get going, and the world's going to keep going, and you're going to be left behind. So there's some pressure there. Well, I'm going to suggest there's another way to respond. And it's not really bad to be tough. It really isn't. If you consider toughness the capacity to recognize your own inner power, but many of us don't really see toughness that way. We see it more as being adversarial to the world. Or we get tough to show somebody that we can be tough because we perceive that they hurt us or wounded us or are against us in some way. So toughness maybe is better than just laying there. But there are, I would say, superior ways to respond. And let's maybe look at some of those. When the going gets tough, we seek and live from grace. How about that? Now that may seem unsatisfying in some respects, depending on the nature of how tough things are when you're sitting at the IRS for the audit. What good's grace going to do? Right? Isn't that the time to get tough and defend your interests? When somebody's just pulled in front of you very abruptly on the 405, causing you a car length's delay in getting to LAX? What good is grace going to do? Grace doesn't show them that they did something wrong. You may not even think when you're in that place when the going it gets tough that grace will even feel very satisfying. What is it anyway, So what we often do is we may or may not get tough, but we certainly usually don't go to grace. What we do is we go to grievance. So here's how to tell if a checklist to see if you're nursing a grievance. And we tend to nurse our grievances. They do require a lot of attention. If you have a grievance, you have to pay a lot of attention to it. So one is, have you told your story more than twice to the same person? If Jeff Foxworthy were here, you might have a grievance if you've told your story more than twice to the same person. You might have a grievance this, do you find yourself having conversations in your head about it? Only 30 or 40 times a day, right? With various outcomes. Kind of interesting. In your story, is there a villain? Is there someone who has done you wrong? Is there someone who, if they only didn't exist, life would be so much easier? And then you get to feel guilty about them because you're related to them and you just wish they didn't exist. Now, the person that cut you off in traffic, you don't feel guilty when you wish they didn't exist because they're just an annoyance. But when it's someone close to you that's the villain, and then you wish them, I wish they didn't exist, or you wish them harm, then you feel guilty about it. So then that's called compounding the felony in terms of your emotional state. Do you look for people with similar stories? I'll show you yours if you show me mine. Or the other way around, I guess. I'm going to put that on Facebook. That was good. I'll show you yours if you show me mine. Wow, that's a shadow story right there, huh? Somebody write that down for me. But do you look for people with similar stories to kind of, you get, and what you're looking for really here is that energetic field of support, Let me find somebody who energetically feels victimized in the same way, and that helps me to feel validated. I heard a story the other day that there's a fellow that he's like a security guard at a building where you have to go get your parking stamped. And when you go up to him and say, "I'd like to be validated," he says, "You're really attractive and very good looking today." But yeah, we do seek to be validated, and when we're in grievance, we seek to be validated by other people with grievances. So that we can say, yeah, this is a, kind of a universal thing. It's looking for connection. Of course, you hope that your grievance is more serious than theirs. Because, size matters. Has it been a while since you checked the details of your story for accuracy? As we go through the grievance process, we often end up in a place that we've exaggerated a little bit. The bad things have gotten worse. What the other person did has changed a little bit. I used to notice that when I was in law enforcement and you would talk to eyewitnesses. The gun got bigger and bigger and bigger. It was like that one that Clint Eastwood carried in the movies, right? One of them big guns, and you find out it was a .22, a little tiny thing. Because it was magnified in the experience because of the fear. And the same can be true with grievances we're carrying. As we generate this energy of negativity and fear about it, we expand it in order to feel justified for generating the energy. So sometimes when you go back and check the story, oh, well, maybe it wasn't quite that bad. Where someone might point it out to you. Hey, they didn't do that, they did this. Oh, come on now. Then you get irritated at them. Then you have a new villain. So quite often when the going gets tough, we go to grievance. And we carry these grievances around that have to be nursed and nourished and kept up. And we may end up with a number of grievances on our plate at one time. That's why Thanksgiving dinner is often so much fun. Oh God, is Aunt Emma going to be there? Remember what happened in 1983? I'm still carrying that around. And Uncle Bob didn't send us a Christmas card last year. That's going to be awkward. Or you have grievances at work, and you find yourself avoiding people or being in the triangulation thing where you find an ally, usually someone with another grievance, and then you talk about the third person. And you wonder why when you go home you just need a drink and want to lay on the couch. You're so tired. Because it's fatiguing to be in grievance. It's a drain. The chemicals we're releasing in our system that cause us to feel the emotions are caustic chemicals that actually wear down our physical structure, our physiological being. It's hard to be happy when you have a grievance because you start to get happy and you remember you have a grievance. Oh, I can't be happy. Or right in the middle of enjoyment, you'll think of the grievance and there goes the enjoyment out the window. See, I can't even enjoy myself because of this villain. And we feel so righteous. See, that's the delicious part. We're so correct. And if we could only share our story with the world, everyone would be on our side. Even if we have a few details fudged. So that's being in grievance. That's what it's like. And quite often when the going does get tough, we go into grievance because we feel in some way powerless to really do anything about it. Maybe we think we should get tough, and that's not either not possible now or it's not who we see ourselves to be. And we haven't really been offered another way out, another way toward resolution, another way to handle all of the energetics that come with being challenged, with being under pressure, with being up against that which we feel is against us in some way. So grace is really a different way of approaching it, is to what is grace? Let's look at this. What is it to us? You get hurt, you get a great disappointment, you find someone there ready to hold your hand in your lowest moment. And when someone else is in the same spot, you hold their hand. That's an example of grace. Grace is what shows up when you need consolation, when you need to see there's more going on than the negative. The problem is it's when we're heavy into grievance, we can't see the grace. See, it has to be a conscious choice to look for the grace in the moment. Sometimes we find that the grace is in the very obstacle or the very thing that causes us to be upset to begin with. That the obstacle we run into, the disappointment, the difficulty, is actually there because we invited it in to lead ourselves out of a place where we were stuck. That's a true sense of grace, is realizing something like that. As Gary Simmons, who was here a couple weeks ago, said, when you realize that everything is for you and nothing is against you. So that's grace. That's an example of grace. You make a bad decision and suffer the consequences. Anyone ever made a bad decision? Anyone? Okay. You make what seems to be a good decision and it has unintended consequences. Ever done that? Some people are there with you through it all, no matter what it costs them. They think that you are worth whatever price has to be paid to be with you, and you're willing to pay the price to be for them too. Be there for them too. That's an example of grace. Quite often grace shows up as people that are just there in support. Who will refuse to see anything less in you, no matter what may be going on in you. And we have that tendency in us to support others. We may not feel we're in a place to do it. And usually we feel we're not in a place to support others when we're in our own grievance in some form or fashion. But there is this kind of an automatic sense of, can I support someone? And I think we really have to be conditioned out of that. And sometimes we are. As kids, we're conditioned out of it because when the tough gets going, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Be tough. Don't be soft. But there's usually a part of us that kind of knows better, that may emerge from time to time. Imagine the feeling of knowing you are grace to someone else's experience. That's got to feel good. Just like it's got to feel good to know that someone else is being grace to your experience. Even if it's just sitting there quietly and not abandoning you. Even if there's no real affirmative energy going on, but just a presence. You feel lost and alone. You begin to despair about whether you can get your life together. You feel trapped. You feel inadequate. And yet you find others who remind you that you are amazing. They make you see the possibilities of each day, and you end up doing the same for them. That's grace. And you may be saying, well, you know, there were times when I was down and nobody supported me. And I would suggest that there probably were people that tried to do it, and maybe you weren't in a position to receive it, or see it, or notice it. I have noticed over the years in ministry that many people in our teaching, when things start to get tough in their life, they stop coming here. Well, you didn't see me for the last 6 months because my life was in total chaos. Yeah, why come to a place that's supportive when your life's in total chaos? We only want people here who have it all together all the time. And I'm being facetious, but see, what drives me away from a support system at the time I would tend to need it, other than my own sense of I don't want to look bad in front of other people. I don't want to be embarrassed and let people know I have a problem, because some people get the idea that in his teaching, if you have it together, you don't have any problems. And if I've conveyed that idea to you, I apologize. I have lots of problems. Some of you are sitting here now. But see, we have to make ourselves available to grace. We have to be willing to be vulnerable in order to receive support. We have to show up in our pain, especially, I would think, in a spiritual community that we have chosen to be part of, because we would recognize that when we show up in our pain, we are supported. There are people here that are dying to help you, that are dying to reach out and connect, because they recognize their own value as they do that. They recognize, we recognize who we really are when our best instincts have an opportunity to express. And that's grace. Something joyful happens. You realize how incredibly fortunate you are just to be alive, to be part of this amazing creation. You recognize that others want to be there to celebrate with you and to be happy with you. And you want to smile and celebrate with them. That too is grace. Grace is having others to share your joy with, and to be there to share in the joy of others. And sometimes, again, if I'm in grievance about something and something good happens to someone else, I don't go into sharing joy, I go into resentment. How come you get all the good stuff and I get all the bad stuff? Why doesn't anything good ever happen to me? So I separate myself out from that possibility of joy. I exclude myself from the experience of grace in that situation. What if my life could get better by someone else having something good happen to them? What if I were to allow for that possibility? Because when you think about it, if we understand how energy works, if we understand consciousness, making yourself available to celebrate the good of others creates a better consciousness, a more loving, building consciousness within yourself. Stepping back in resentment to someone else's good fortune darkens your sense of self. Now, we're not necessarily thinking that in the moment, we're just going with the feelings. And when I'm in grievance, the feelings can just cascade. The negativity can just pour through me because I've created that channel. And it's one thing after the other. And somebody will say, what about this good thing? That was a good thing. Not really. Let me tell you why it wasn't. And I have to quick come up with a reason to rationalize my own sense of how I'm feeling. You know, the interesting thing is that when you're in joy, you rationalize that too. You rationalize why the horrible thing ought to be good. We're not rational beings, we're rationalizing beings. We tend to make the world conform to our current state of mind and state of heart. So if I'm cultivating a positive state of mind and an uplifted state of heart, a loving state of heart, I will tend to make the world conform to that in my own interpretation of whatever's going on. And the opposite is also true. If I'm in grievance, I will tend to make the world one big grievance. And if you're not in grievance, I will remind you why you should be. Misery does love company, but so does joy. Joy loves company too. Grace leads you to the source of grace. It reminds you that every day is another opportunity to be touched and changed by love in some way. A love that's a gift, pure and simple, given without any condition whatsoever. No requirements, no strings attached, because that's how love works. When we're in grievance, we're always looking for an angle. We're usually looking to figure out a clever way out of our situation. At the same time, we're bemoaning the situation. And we're seeing impossibility everywhere. And we're making everyone else wrong. Grace is simply there as a realization of what is already true. No strings attached. Simply because you're worth it. Grace is a reminder that you're worth it. I mentioned Reverend Maggie's Facebook post that she put up the other day during the meditation. That spoke, I could see by the comments, it spoke to so many people. You know, my friend and colleague Dr. Charles Getty says, you know, and I've said this before, but he says, I love this quote, he says, you arrived on this planet without an instruction manual and you were misinformed about who you are. And most of us in our culture, and I don't know other cultures as well as our culture, I know most people in our culture grow up thinking there's something basically wrong with them. That we were somehow, either individually or universally or both, were flawed creatures. Born with original sin, or some version of that. And then that gets confirmed throughout our lives. By parents, by friends, by coaches, by teachers, by bosses. Who rarely, if ever, tell us the truth about ourselves. About 10 years ago, I was doing a newspaper interview in Fort Lauderdale, and the reporter said, "What's the hardest thing about ministry?" And I said, "Telling people that they're valuable. Because the looks I get in return so often are, 'I'll show you.' Oh yeah? You think I'm valuable?" Or the tears start. Because when you tell someone they are loved, you pierce the mask for a minute. The mask we've all put up that, oh, well, I'm fine, everything's fine, I'm tough. I'm on top of everything. I've got it together. And usually it takes about 2 or 3 words to break through that. We don't do it to each other very often because it's so disturbing. Why are you so unhappy? And then that look of shock when you, oh my God, they know. And we can do spiritual bypass, which happens a lot in this teaching. Shut up and pray. Pretend it's okay. Do a treatment that underneath the emotional self is in turmoil, but the words sound good. And let's pretend everything's okay. Oh, that treatment worked. I feel much better now. No, I've had a moment to reconstruct. The reality is that most of us are very close to being in tears a great deal of the time. We're being furious. Being in a rage. And it doesn't take a lot to trigger it, does it, when you go out in the world? In traffic. Road rage is just a place where it's acceptable. You're in your own car. I've seen it happen in line at the 7-Eleven. I've seen it happen at a gas pump. I've seen it happen at many computer screens when no one knows they're being watched. So a lot of our energy goes into holding it together so that we will appear to be in charge. That's not grace. That's not grace. That's not being vulnerable. That's not being honest. That's not living a life of joy. And yet we do it so much of the time because we're terrified of really revealing what's inside of us, because we think we'll be all alone. Everybody will just run for the hills when they see what's really going on inside of here. The only ones that would run away are the ones that have the same fear. That if they responded to you honestly, you would see what was inside of them. And the other part of the truth is that, yeah, that's there. That fear is there. That dread, that terror of being revealed is there in all of us to some extent. But it's only a thin internal layer, like a piece of paper. And on the other side of that is pure love. On the other side of that is an infinite power. On the other side of that is God, Spirit, the infinite, being restrained by that layer of fear. It's grace waiting for you to say yes to it. Grace is a reminder that you are worth it, period, no qualifiers. Self-worth cannot be added to or subtracted from. It is total. Your essential worth is intrinsic. It's not extrinsic. It doesn't matter what you've done or haven't done. Your essential self-worth is unaffected. That's what they should have been telling you from day one. Who? Whoever. Somebody. Maybe your crazy old aunt. But if they told you anything else, it wasn't true. It was a cultural story designed to keep up appearances. Because we're also terrified that if appearances went away, it wouldn't be pretty. We did a thought exercise in my ministerial class years ago. What would it be like if everybody told the truth all the time? I think a Jim Carrey movie had come out where he had to do that or something. And the answer we came up with after a couple of weeks of really talking about it was there'd be about 6 weeks of chaos, and then we get used to it. There'd be about 6 weeks of people going, oh my God. And after a while, yeah, okay, yeah. Because once you get through that initial difference, it becomes routine. And once you've told a couple of horror stories, you usually run out. And they become stale and old and uninteresting. It's kind of interesting how that works. Bob Goff says, grace can't be outsmarted, outworried, or outrun. Throw back your arms and fall into it. Grace cannot be approached frontally. You cannot go toward it. You have to fall into it. It's release. It's surrender. So when the going gets tough, fall into grace. That's not an easy thing to do. It requires trust in the ultimate reality. So here's my suggestion. Here's a little homework assignment this week, and you can take it as far as you want. Tell your truth this week. Tell your truth. And if your truth comes out as anger, recognize that's your work to do. That's not the other person's fault. But tell your truth 10% more. Have one difficult conversation this week that you've been putting off. And be willing to be vulnerable in that conversation and be willing to accept that the other person may not be able to do that. Be open to grace. It's everywhere. Thank you, and namaste.